Good afternoon and welcome to the first virtual update from IMD's Global Centres. I'm delighted to be joined today by Professor Tom Malnight. Tom, many thanks for being with us today. So for those of our viewers who may not be familiar with IMD's Global Centres, can you tell us first of all, what is an IMD Global Centre?
One of the issues we face as an institution is that how do we stay ahead? How do we essentially make sure that we're developing thought leadership, not only so that we can stay ahead in our programs, but also so that we can stay ahead as academics. So how do we keep ahead? So what we've done at IMD now is we've set up a set of global centers, and each of these centers focuses on a different constituent. So for example, mine is the Global CEO Center. So we're focusing on the role and the agenda of the CEO. And what are the challenges facing a CEO and staying ahead? And we have another center that's focused on the business, the supply chain, focusing on supply chain 2020. What does a business model have to look like in 2020? Mm-hmm. And we have another that's focusing on family business. And yet another that's focusing on the governance and role of boards. So each of these areas, what we're saying is these are areas that we as an institution have to stay ahead ourselves intellectually, so that not only what we deliver in our programs, but also how we work with our participants is leading edge. And that's what the centers are about.
So tell us more about your center. You said it was a Global CEO Center. The title is Leading in a Connected Future. What is that all about?
What this is about is the origin of our center actually started back in 2009 when we started a research project that we interviewed 80 CEOs and other major leaders from around the world. And what we were focusing on in those interviews is we were very explicit. When we started the interview, said, we're not interested in hearing what you're doing this year or next year. We're sure you've got many people covering it. You've all planned in terms of how you're delivering it. What we're interested in talking with you about, as a leader of a company, as a CEO, is how do you see the challenges that's facing your business, that's facing your organization, and yourself as a leader in the 5-year plus time frame. We have a conviction that too often today businesses are becoming too short-term oriented, and they're focusing in many cases on the quarterly results and the immediate pressures, and our fear is at the expense of preparing for the long term. So the focus of our research project was, what are firms doing today, not just to deliver today, because of course they have to deliver today, mm-hmm. but they also have to prepare for the longer term. So what came out of our research was that this is an issue that many CEOs themselves are struggling with. I mean, how do I not just to deliver today, but how do I to think about what is necessary for me to do today to prepare for a sustainable success, not just for the business, but for my organization and for myself as a leader. So that's what the focus of our center is on. It's what do leaders of major companies have to do to prepare to succeed in the 5-year plus agenda and time frame, and what are they doing today to prepare? Okay. Not just talking about it, but what are they doing?
So you've interviewed close to 100 CEOs exactly. in this process. This is a pretty major undertaking. Can you give us a bit of a glimpse, a bit of an overview of some of the insights that came from those interviews?
Okay. There's a series, obviously, and one of the things that we have is we have a tremendous richness of data that we're tapping into, because each of these interviews that we do lasts roughly an hour and a half to 2 hours, and they're very open interviews. They're very frank interviews. I think one of the major findings that we're focusing on now, that we'll talk about a little bit more detail in another update, has to do with the need for firms to move away from a transactional view of what they do. Too many firms today, what I do is I sell you products. I'm fixed. I do fine. I sell you a product. Or I, as a firm, I hire you, as an employee. Or I obey the laws and regulations. And we kind of have this view of a firm transacting with these other stakeholders at different points of time. And what we found in many of the CEOs saying is, if you look at the future, there's a number of things that we know very well will happen. One, the future will be more ambiguous. Second, it will be more uncertain. Third, it will be more complex. So in an environment like that, this transactional view is not going to allow firms to be successful. What they need to do is they need to move to more relations. So then what we found in our research was that companies that we call level 2 relationships. Level 1 is kind of transactions. Level 2 relationships say, okay, I'll do a relationship with you more, but I'm not going to change. I'm going to kind of keep doing what I'm doing, and I'll expand the nature of my relationship with you. So, for example, with selling a product, what I'll do is I'll sell you a product, and I'll also give you services that go along with it. Or in working with employees, it's not just I'm going to hire you, but I'm going to hire and retain and develop you to keep you with me longer. Or with society, what I'll do is I'll not just obey the laws and regulations, but I'll also set up a CSR department. Mm-hmm. But those are still interested primarily in protecting the interest of the firm, mm-hmm. and they're saying, how do I benefit? The biggest challenge that we've seen is when you're dealing with CEOs preparing for this uncertainty in the future, they need to move to what we call a level 3 relationship. And level 3 relationship was truly where it's mutually beneficial. And that the idea is that I as a firm have to be willing to change, mm-hmm. at my core. Mm-hmm. I have to be willing to change the products that I produce, the services that I offer. I have to change my mindset. I have to change my way of working. I have to change my relationship with each of these stakeholders so that there is a mutual benefit, so that we can tap into each other's strengths and both succeed. And if you looked at the Harvard Business Review lately, Michael Porter wrote an article called Shared Value. And it's how we have to change the mindset of the firms to focus more on this concept of shared value, mm-hmm. and mutual success, as opposed to at each point of time, I deliver results, I measure my success, and good luck to you.
So, I mean, a lot of this sounds relatively complicated. You mentioned you went in to talk to CEOs and said to them, let's not talk about the next couple of years, let's really think about the future. This is a future that we're saying is going to be more complex, is going to be more uncertain, is going to be more volatile. How is leading in a connected future going to help these CEOs?
One of the things that we're doing is we're trying to break down the issue into smaller pieces. Because as you're right, as a whole, it's too complex to think of as a whole. So what we're doing is we're focusing on identifying which are the different areas that there's required change within a firm, and which are the areas that that a leader in an organization has to modify what it does, how it thinks, and how it prepares. So our focus is to say, the overall problem, it's easy to say, let's go from transactions to relations, but what does it mean in practice? Mm-hmm. What does it mean in terms of how you deal with consumers? What does it mean in terms of how you deal with the employees and with society, and also with your owners? And what does it mean in terms of the mindset of the leader? So that the focus of what we're getting at is, let's help, first of all, break down the problem into more manageable pieces. And by doing that, let's come up with what are the exact challenges facing CEOs. The interesting thing that we saw in many of our interviews is many times the interview, of course, when you go in and see a busy CEO, the first thing he says is, we're busy, can we get this done in an hour? We don't have as much time as I thought. But often what we found was that they were the ones who were taking the interviews longer, because these are issues that they're also trying to articulate and trying to struggle with themselves. So what the center is going to focus on is how can we help these people, these top leaders of organizations, think through and understand these issues so that they can start to take the actions today that they need to prepare their organizations for the longer term. Mm-hmm. And it's not a simple process. This is not one of those things where you come in and say, we'll do A, B, C, D. No. First of all, let's break the problem down and understand it in a way that we can think about, how do we need to change? Well, how does this impact us? So the IMD Global CEO Center, leading in a connected future, is about how can we first of all help these top leaders understand the dimensions of the challenge, how can we help them understand what are the issues, and how can we help them start to develop solutions for themselves.
Okay. And in concrete terms then, what's going to be the output of this center?
There's 4 different areas that we're going to do, that we'll see output coming from our center. The first one is there'll be a series of papers, a series of cases, a series of publications, essentially. And what those are all about is kind of this idea of breaking down the problem and exploring it from looking at across all of the interviews. Mm-hmm. The second output will be we'll be developing some materials that can be used in classrooms. The classrooms can either be here, they can be at IMD, in our programs, they can be in companies, they can be in different areas. The third output is we intend to develop some programs. The programs where we can actually work with some senior leadership teams, maybe some top teams of companies, maybe in the people who report to a CEO, the future people who can be the CEO, and try to present the challenges, these long-term challenges, to this group of executives to say, how do we help prepare our organization? And this is not where you come together for 1 week. It's more like, how do we work with an organization for short stints over a year or 2 years to help them think these through. But these would be very customized for a particular firm in and of itself. And the fourth one output is we're going to be creating some different types of dialogues or formats or forums that are not focused on just talking, where we talk and you listen. It's more focused on how do we create dialogues and debates so we can actually have exchanges about these issues. How can we actually start conversations where we can challenge each other? So some of these will be small, what we're going to call roundtable discussions. Some of them may be forums. Some of them may be focused. But a series of ways, including on the Learning Network, we hope, a series of ways that we can actually engage with senior executives, not just in interviews, but on a more regular basis to challenge our thinking, to help us learn, and also to help them learn. So it's a mutual learning process. So those are the 4 areas that we'll be focusing on. And
you mentioned there about the Corporate Learning Network. There are going to be some special services for Corporate Learning Network partners as well.
Of course, yes. I mean, I think one of the things that we believe is that in order for the kind of relationship that we need to work, it actually needs to be a partnership between the organization and IMD. Because it's not just a one-time interaction. It's how do we keep a relationship? How do we, what's the relationship should include access to the materials, the thought leadership, the idea to challenge them, the idea to see them, the idea to participate in our studies. We'd love to interview the CEOs of the Learning Network members. But also to how do we engage them in dialogues? How do we actually go in and help them? What kind of programs could be useful to you? So and involve them in the forums as well. So I think the Learning Network will be one of the key ways that we try to develop a partnership with companies who have a similar interest that we do. And how do I prepare for the future?
And in practical terms, the first output of that for Learning Network members, we're going to have a special event towards the end of this year in November.
What we're doing, what's interesting for us is if we looked at the interviews that we did in 2009 and 2010, we did a lot of interviews that were in Europe and North America. We did some in Brazil. We did some in China. But this year, and at the end of that, we did a presentation to a CEO roundtable, which is also part of our Learning Network membership last year. And we found a high degree of interest in it, but also a question that came back to us. A question that came back to us is, how is the world different in some of the other developing countries, the high growth markets? How is, we can understand that this is good for understanding our situation, but how is the world different there? So what we're doing this year is we're conducting our interviews. We've already been down in South Africa, where we interviewed 12 fascinating CEOs, just fascinating. The way the issues, the opportunities, the challenges are fascinating. We'll also be doing interviews with CEOs in Indonesia, and more extensively in India and in China again. And we'll be doing in Singapore and Thailand and a little bit of Vietnam. So the idea here now is that how do we understand not just what's on the CEO agenda in the markets that we know well, but how about these other markets as well? How about the markets that we want to know well? And how can we learn across those? So what I hope we'll be able to do, and what I expect that we'll be able to do in the session in November, the discovery event in November, will be not just share the learning from the first round of interviews, but also to launch some of the insights from the second round. We're calling it, what do we learn from the big and beyond? The Brazil, India, China, and beyond markets. And I think that's going to be the exciting opportunity that we'll have there.
Great. Well, Tom, thanks very much for setting the scene. That gives us a nice overview of what's coming. And you're also going to be coming back in on a regular basis to do some virtual updates to share with us what's going on in the research.
Right now we've had a year and a half of research and a year and a half of thoughts. And the more we can start start the exchanges, start putting some ideas out and starting the dialogues, the better it will be. So yeah, I look forward to many conversations with you.
Great. Tom, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.